I would like to ask you about solar energy and the whole idea of resilience and
Right.
community resilience, and how, when we're talking about from a social standpoint and culture, and this idea of making communities more resilient, how solar energy can play a role in that.
Hmm. I think it's a good question, and I think it needs to start with what I consider to be some of the very basic fundamentals of the energy system change. And there, I think there are four things that we have to have really firmly in mind that are truly boundaries in this transition that we shouldn't cross. The first is this transition needs to be just. We can't be leaving populations out. In any innovative change, there are winners and losers, and we need to be conscious of those people that are going to be losers in the change. I'm thinking now of coal miners and people that have worked at coal electrical generating stations, and eventually there's going to be that's going to widen out to other fossil fuels. So not leaving people out and being just in this transition. A second thing that I think is critically important is there can be no disruptions in the provision of energy. You have to get energy provision that is reliable and that can support the needs of the population, both in terms of their core basic needs as well as industrial and economic needs. The third thing I would point to is it needs to be affordable. Energy is the lifeblood, and you can't be pricing people out of the market. And then finally, we have to be net zero carbon. So whatever system we design, we have to do all of those things. So the starting point then is whatever system you put together, it needs to look like that when we arrive at the destination where we think we're trying to go. Now, the second big thing I would say, relevant to your question about resilience, is this point again that change is going on at multiple different scales. And so resilience is going to mean different things at different scales. Where I think solar energy can be really important in resilience is more at the local or regional level, because now you can talk in terms of what happens if there is a storm, what happens if there is some human event that takes place that disrupts the system. The bigger provision of the system. And now you can ask, well, how do we design a system that would be resilient? And solar energy is a great way to do that. Solar energy plus batteries is a great way to set up systems that can be islanded in the event that there's grid issues. When they're done right, and I want to emphasize when they're done right, they actually are pretty resilient to storms as well. And there, the main thing I would emphasize is one of the very first lessons I learned about installing solar panels came from a guy when I asked him, well, why is the foundation for the solar panel so sturdy? They're not that heavy. And he said, oh, these are not for holding the solar panels up. They're for holding them down. Oh, they make great kites. So I think we should feel all very encouraged that in the case of Puerto Rico, for example, where there was such devastation to the conventional grid, many of the solar installations came through that fine. They were installed well, they had taken into account wind speeds and that sort of thing, and they survived. So I think there's a real opportunity to get local level resilience. Now, over the long term, I think the whole system's going to be built on solar. So at that point, it's kind of a moot question because we make the system work. We put in multiple levels of redundancy and resilience measures, and it runs on solar.
My last question for you is, what are the biggest challenges that you see, I think more from maybe, or resistance to change comes into this, but policy is going to play a role in this future and the role of solar in that. And what would you like to see happen? Not, I guess, if you look at it on a state level, then as a country, but then also on a global scale, when it comes to policy toward solar?
Mm-hmm. I'm optimistic about where policy is going to go. To begin with, I think the wars about climate change are over. In fact, they ended several years ago now. And frankly, they only were serious wars in the United States. Mm-hmm. But that's important because the United States has been in the way pretty much exclusively, contrary to many narratives. The problem with getting global agreements has been in the United States for quite a long time. I think that era is past us now, and we're now into a time where people are asking the question, what does the new system need to look like? And there again, I'm optimistic on the policy front because there are real economic benefits, I think, to be derived from moving to the kind of new energy system that we've been talking about. And as more and more people see what those benefits look like, I think you're going to see a tendency or willingness to put policies in place that will encourage them. So I really think on the policy front, there's reason to be optimistic. Now, I suppose the lead-on question then to that would be, well, what policies do you have in mind specifically? And there, I think that there are a few things that we're going to simply have to do. One is to recognize that we have delayed too long. Humanity has delayed too long addressing the climate problem. We're going to end up with too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and some of that's got to come back out again. Nature is the best way to take that back out again, but I think we have to be cognizant of the very real possibility that nature can't get it all done, and certainly won't be able to get it all done fast enough, in my opinion. So that means we're going to have to use engineering to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. That means we're going to have to price carbon. Now, there I think it could get easier to think about policy, because if you're taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and you're storing it as a way to get it out and safely put away, then you know what the carbon price needs to be. The carbon price is whatever it costs to take it out of the atmosphere and store it. So that's where we have to begin moving the system to globally, but especially here in the United States. We need to put a price in place, and that price has to eventually rise to whatever it costs to capture from the air and put it underground. Now again, I think that there's going to be some good reasons why people will be more open to that idea going forward, because I think there's going to be economic opportunities associated with it. So at this stage, I think the most important thing is going to be the policy to control carbon and to make it attractive for there to be businesses in that area. Then I think with solar energy continuing to go down in price, in part because of industrial innovation, in part because of support to R&D that's coming from central governments, federal governments, I think we're going to have the energy we need at a price we can afford to pay, and we're going to know what we need to do.
This has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and talk to me.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.